Oh, how's everybody doing? Good. That was a resounding
We're all here.
That was a total thud. Okay, well, we'll get into it one way or the we're gonna get into it one way or the other. Okay, so this being said, first of all, welcome. Based on kind of the weeks that we've kind of been having, it seemed to make a little bit of sense for Rabbi Stoller and I to kind of do these in separate settings, not because of anything between the two of us, but because it would give a little bit of a break to us individually, which is a good thing, because human sacrifice of rabbis is really not is frowned upon, and so although somebody joked on Facebook today when I was talking about the idea of having the high holidays done via Zoom, they joke that, well, in that case you could probably do you could do sacrifice, and I said, it would make it but nevertheless, it may draw more people. It may draw more people in to watch. So you never sure what you want to ask for before it happens. That said, okay, so enough of the blind humor. What I want to jump into is the following, and I'm going to talk for a couple minutes, but I really want this to be a little bit more of a conversation perhaps than it's been in the past. And so while I'm so thankful to Cassandra for muting everybody, by the way, isn't that the coolest thing ever? Like, you're never going to want to go to a meeting ever again without a mute all button. Like, you're going to want to have a button at every meeting you possibly go to, that you have a button where you can just turn everybody's voice off. So that is something I highly suggest for when we get out of this whole nonsense, that you allow yourself. So just to wax rabbinic for a moment, if you'll grant me, when Rabbi Stoller and I spoke about this topic many moons ago, one of the topics that kind of came up, or the conversation, was this idea.
34 people there.
Almost everybody was being spiritual but not religious, or what did it mean? What did spirituality mean, and God? And there were all kinds of kind of different questions. And the title, we started with "Are You There, God?" And of course, there is the beautiful book that is written by Judy Bloom of "Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret." I will admit that as a 17 or 18-year-old male at the time, that was not really a book that I read specifically. So for folks who have read that book, that really wasn't in my repertoire of books that were read. Nevertheless, I want to talk about it today because there was a PhD paper that was written about that book, and it's Jewish content. And I think it's really interesting, and so hopefully it'll bring about some thoughts. But what I want to push us on today, or on this evening, is the idea of this concept of being spiritual but not religious. And so for a lot of people, I will tell you that idea, people will come up to me all the time and they'll say, "Rabbi, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious." And I'll be really upfront with you and tell you, while my office is on the first floor, so I can't jump out the window. But if I could, I would. If I could climb to the second floor, which still, by the way, wouldn't hurt me enough because it's not tall enough at Bethel. Maybe I could go to the top of the sanctuary at Temple, God forbid. But nevertheless, it kills me because I don't know what the word spiritual means. Like I don't. And I don't mean that in to knock it. I don't mean to belittle it. And please, by the way, feel free to chat or raise your hand or do any of the cool options that Zoom has to kind of disagree with me and get in conversation. I don't mean this to be totally frontal at the moment. but I never understood what spirituality meant. And by the way, I may not be well read on a number of topics, but when it comes to prayer and spirituality and God, like I've read a fair amount. And there are great books on the revolution that is taking place right now. Some people call it the nuns. And by the way, nuns, I don't mean like the Catholic priests and nuns. I mean like the NONES, those who don't find themselves to be religious, but yet they find themselves to be spiritual in some capacity. And I'll tell you the following. So I grew up in Washington, D.C. I've used this before with our board at the synagogue. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I will admit to you right now, if we can keep this between just, the 38 of us, right? I do not always find myself when I'm at Bethel to be spiritually moved, as hard as that may be to believe, right? I don't find myself to be spiritually moved. When I go for a run in my hometown of Washington, D.C., every time I go for a run, I don't care if it's rain or snow or beautiful, I stop on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and I get goosebumps. By the way, not like our president did the other day. Like it's a different experience. And okay, for those that smiled at that, that was good. And for those that didn't, I apologize. Just know that like, I can read you, I can see you. I don't want to hear from you, but I get you. So I go and I stop, and it's a spiritual experience, right? I've seen Hamilton now like 4 or 5 times. It was spiritual. It surely was not religious, but it was spiritual, right? So there really is something there that can make something spiritual, but not religious. I wanna go on a couple people here. So Debbie, you're on. Debbie, if you want to unmute yourself. I tried, but it didn't work. Yeah, there you go. You're good.
I think that when people ask you that, they also don't know. And it might be a question of 7-Up, like 7-Up is the uncola,
Sure.
I'm spiritual, but I'm not rapping to Philin in the morning. I'm spiritual, but I'm not wearing a shadel, or I don't go to shul every Saturday, but I want to be a part of this.
So if I'm hearing you right, and please make sure I'm framing it correctly, they don't want to call themselves religious. Like they're worried that because they don't do those things, they're worried that would be what religious is. But I feel connected to being Jewish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call myself spiritual.
That's my thesis.
No, and I'm not negating it. I just want to make sure I'm hearing it.
You got it.
Perfect. Mimi, long as you're driving safely, you can
No,
go for it.
I just pulled over because I was just someplace else. I have to get us dinner. But so I grew up Catholic, and so Debbie, I respect what you just said. So because my son is, I guess, religious, right? In Israel. But when I grew up Catholic, well, everybody believed in God because I went to Christ King, right? So then I went to Duchenne, and everybody believed in God there. But then when I got out in the world, even like, I don't think Michael believed it. My first husband didn't believe in God, and my second husband doesn't believe in God, and they're Jewish, right? So, and they're not spiritual, but they call me spiritual. Why? Because I believe in God. But also, it's the feeling. I think spiritual. So what I'm saying is, I think spirituality is just a feeling like you have a connection with God. And a lot of people are afraid of that word God. So they feel it, but they don't want to say the word God. Does that make sense?
It makes okay. Amazing. And it's even better that I found a pen to write notes on as you're saying that. So even better. So first of all, drive safely. That's number one.
No. I'm going into Brahms to get a dinner, but I wanted to say it because I'm hungry, right? But I wanted to say it before I get a dinner. So yeah. Okay. And nobody can hear us, right? Good.
So here's the deal. I think to both of those points, you're right on. I think there's something about God that is scary as can be, right? I think there's a reason, thank God, I mean, I've never been in a 12-step program, but that there is like, that it says, right, you're supposed to believe in something greater than yourself, right? It doesn't say you've got to believe in God, right? It simply says there's something bigger than you in the universe. And by the way, for what it's worth, as a total aside, if you think that you are the center and there isn't something bigger than you, then we need to have a separate talk after this session, right? We can have a drink, we can do whatever you want, but we've got to have a whole different conversation, right? Because there's something greater than you in the universe, and it isn't you. And that's what AA was built on, right? It wasn't making, because of the fact that, think of like the goals of the Serenity Prayer. I can't handle everything, right? So I'm going to throw some things up in the air to you because I can't handle all of this. I can't deal with everything that's here. So I'm going to throw some things up, right? And there's some beauty to that. Now, to what Mimi said, and I think to what Debbie said, right? Just very quickly. First of all, if you don't have time on your hand, I mean, I don't have time on my hands, but if you have time on your hands, which I imagine some of you may, whether it be by Kindle or Amazon, I would highly suggest that you read a book by Daniel Gordis called God Was Not in the Fire, okay? And Gordis in God Was Not in the Fire does this amazing thing. So to Mimi's point, which I think is really, really brilliant, right? So I'm going to do a gross generalization here, and so I'm going to apologize now. I'm going to so that my forgiveness has already been asked for. If you walk into a Catholic church and you walk up to the priest, right? So you walk up to Father Tom Fangman, who I love and adore, so I can use him as an example. So you walk up to Father Tom Fangman in Elkhorn, massive church at St. Pat's. We're talking about like 10,000 people. I mean, like, and by the way, they didn't open, right? None of the major Catholic churches opened because they were too scared based on the numbers for like in Nebraska. So like kol hakavod to them, right? So, okay, so you go up to Father Tom and you say, Father Tom, I love you, right? You're the best, right? I love you. You are amazing. I get the service. I buy into the service. But this whole Jesus thing, I'm having a hard time. Right, I really doesn't work for me. I'm good for the snack in the middle of service for communion. I'm good for all these other things, but the Jesus thing doesn't work for me, right? Father Tom, as much as a mensch as he is, for those of you who are laughing, thank you, right? Father Tom is going to give you a big hug because well, not at the moment, but in general, because he's amazing. And he's going to say to you, there's a big issue here because our theology is based upon the fact that this exists, right? We're based on the fact that that believing in Jesus is part and parcel of your Catholicism. It just is. It just is. But here's the problem, and I can only speak for Bethel, although with Andy here, I'm going to venture to guess I venture to guess this does not happen at Temple either. I'm not going to speak for Beth Israel, but I'm fairly confident for both Bethel and Temple, we're on the same page. Is that when we go back to Bethel and Temple for services, and even when we were there before, there is while we have an usher every Shabbat welcoming you in, right? They do not ask you if you believe in God. Right? Nobody would consider asking you when you walk into services, when you get there in the morning, right? Morning minyan, evening minyan, Saturday services, Kabbalat Shabbat. Can you imagine someone, as you walk in the door, saying, do you believe in God? Doesn't happen, right? There's no litmus test for our belief, for our level of belief in how this works, right? So we love the person who walks in the door who's the skeptic, right? The skeptic is like my guy or my gal. Like I want skepticism. I want you to have doubts. I want you to have questions. I want you to be unsure. But I'll be really, really upfront with you into the following. I love the story that one of my teachers at the seminary gave to me, which is we were talking about theology, and Neil Gilman, before he died, clearly before he died, he couldn't have given it to me afterward. But Neil Gilman of blessed memory, Neil made the comment once, he put a Punnett square on the board, and Neil said the following: if you believe in God and there isn't a God, okay, no big deal. If you believe in a God and there is a God, well, I mean, all right, I mean, like, that may work out well for you. If you don't believe in God and there is no God, well, what have you really wasted? If you don't believe a God and there is a God, you may be screwed, right? I mean, who knows? I mean, pardon my language, but like you may be out of luck, okay? Now, that was his version of this. My feeling becomes the following, which is it's for me, and this is my personal theology. is that by me having a belief in God, it allows me to have someone to be angry at. I don't need, to Debbie's point, I happen to put on tefillin, but I don't necessarily, well, and not a sheitel, although I could probably figure it out with my hair. So with that being said, that made me laugh. So it was kind of funny. So that being said, the reality would be is that I have been mad at moments in my life. And I've had nobody to directly be mad at. I am furious at what is going on in the world right now. I am terrified. I am scared. I don't know what to do. And by the way, I don't blame God. But if I wanted to, I believe in the depth of my being that God has thick skin.
Can I just say one thing? Because I have to start driving.
Yeah.
No, both husbands who don't believe in God would talk to God when they get mad. That's all I want to say. They would say, "God damn it!" You know, they would.
Yeah,
I mean, I swear, guys. I'm like, you don't believe in God? Why are you know? Like, but to your point, right?
That's it, right? That's the trick to this, right? I mean, we all know the story of the guy driving around to the spot at the supermarket, right? And it's like, I always imagine this taking place in Great Neck, New York, for those who know this, like, because there's nowhere to park at the supermarket in Great Neck. I don't know why that always worked for me, but they're driving around Great Neck and they can't find a place to park at the Great Neck, at the little supermarket. And the next thing you know, the old man looks up at God and he says, "God, if only you were to give me a parking spot, I would make sure to always believe in all of your beliefs and observe kashrut and observe Shabbat." And the next thing you know, a spot opens up and he looks up at God and he says, "Never mind, I found a better spot." Right? So like, we're so quick, right? We're so quick when something hits the fan that we immediately, the minute something hits the fan, we want to be mad. Well, God has thick skin and we can be mad at. I don't care if it's 9/11. I don't care if it's the coronavirus. I don't care what it is. We have the ability to be mad at God, and God can handle it. What's ironic in some ways about our belief in God, and the rabbis talk about this, right? Think about morning services. For those who attend or at least are familiar with the service, we thank God. We thank God for letting us wake up in the morning. We say Hashkivenu at night, for letting us go to bed at night and wake up in the morning, because, by the way, for what it's worth, a different class for a different day. We do believe in like demons and things in the middle of the night that could like do certain things to us and whatever. And the Hashkivenu prayer, for as beautiful as Hashkivenu Adonai, da 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 da. Yeah, that's supposed to be keeping away evil spirits. So I don't know if the da 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 is really actually doing it, but that's the whole point of the prayer. Right? It was about keeping away the evil spirits when you go to bed. Which, by the way, may have just ruined it for all of you. So I'm really, really sorry. But that being said, like, that was the essence of the prayer. And we're saying it because we're fearful. Now, just going back a step or a foot. For many of us, whether it's Hamilton, whether it's a play, whether it's any other experience that we have, we find something godlike and or spiritual in those moments, right? There's a great book, and I'm going to butcher the name. I'm not going to butcher because I'm just not even going to name the author, because I'm not in my office. I don't have the name, which is the killer part of not being in my office anymore. There is a book called I think it's Being a Religious Atheist. I'll find it and I'll get it to you via email. I think it's called Being a Religious Atheist. And the idea of the book, right, the general understanding of the book is that the person could go to a place would religiously, dare I say it that way, go to a place like for a lecture, right? Or they would go to the symphony and they would be moved. I mean, they would have goosebumps up and down their arms and they would be totally moved. But if you took them to services, they're looking at their watch saying, "Oh man, when in the name of God is this going to be over? Like, really? This is what I have to do twice a year in order to win, like, you know, whatever with you?" And so I think it's really tough. And so I think to Debbie's point, I think that people didn't know what to do with the word religious because we've bastardized it and we've made it look like a certain thing. And so they came up with this other word called spiritual. And the reality is they're actually the same thing. But we don't feel comfortable saying it because we think we're something else. Let me, before we jump into Judy Blume and some other kind of nonsense, what are some other, not that Judy Blume is nonsense, don't tell her. She's alive, right? I'm pretty sure.
Oh,
So, Rabbi,
No,
there's
oh, really? Damn. All right. Well, then let her memory be for a blessing.
so there's a story, Rabbi. There's a story I heard years ago where it's Kol Nidre night, and the congregants are coming in. The rabbi's greeting them outside the door. Mr. Cohen comes in. They go through all the pleasantries. Rabbi says, "Mr. Cohen, can I ask you a question?" Mr. Cohen says, "Yeah. Do you believe in God?" Mr. Cohen says, "Yes," and goes in. Mr.
Okay.
Levine is next, and the rabbi says to Mr. Levine, "Do you believe in God and Kol Nidre night?" And Mr. Levine says, "No." And the rabbi says, "Why are you here?" And Mr. Levine answers, "Just in case."
Yeah. That's it. By the way, I apologize real quick before I go back to Andy. It's Alain de Botton. It's clearly French, and it's Religion for Atheists is the name of the book. So exactly right. Why are you here? Just in case. Right? Like just in case there's something else there. I want to be there. And by the way, it's also very Kaplanian, which for those of you who had a better, I mean, I knew Rabbi Kripke. I got to know him and to talk to him, but you know, I didn't know him.
But for the reason,
Rabbi Kripke was Kaplanian, right? Rabbi Kripke was a Reconstructionist thought thinker, which would have been to Andy's point of the latter part of the joke, right? Like he would have believed in a civilization that makes decision making, not necessarily a higher power that's needed. But you know something? I bet there were mornings where Rabbi Kripke may have shown up at shul just in case. Right? Like, am I willing to concede the point that there isn't a God? I'm not giving that sermon.
but,
Right? Yeah.
But also to your point, well, one of the reasons in the prayers where we always praise God, but then we say, "Who is God?" If God made the earth, God gave the food, God. So just in case someone comes into shul, as you say, which many people do, they don't believe in God. The liturgy, if we understand the English, tells us every time we come to pray what and who God is, for the reason that I believe that most people don't know who God is or what God does. So it's every time you pray, you reinforce either your belief or you talk yourself out of it, but at least the information is there.
Well, okay, so I'm gonna put. It's funny, as I share the screen, everybody just became really, really small. Sherry, hold on 1 second, or I'm gonna forget what I'm about to say. And so I'd rather not that I want you to forget what you're gonna say, but you're gonna tell Jeff so you don't forget. So the one of the reasons I can't stand the prayer book, the actual Siddur,
here someplace. Like girls.
is because of the actual fact that the Siddur does what Andy just said, right? It in some ways concretizes for us what God is and doesn't necessarily give us the time and the space to be able to flesh it out for ourselves, right? Like we're not pushed, right? God is this. There may be somebody who happens to be on this call, so I'm not gonna name names, who made a comment, boys and girls, who made a comment to me, who said, you know something, I can't stand that the New Conservative Siddur uses Avinu Malkeinu and doesn't translate Avinu Malkeinu. So what they do is that when we do get to the High Holiday Liturgy, it says Avinu Malkeinu, and then in the English it says Avinu Malkeinu. They're like, how did the rabbis not have any guts to just say, our Father, our King? I mean, that's the translation, right? And they couldn't do it because they wanted to be gender neutral and they wanted to be this and they wanted to be that. So what did they end up doing? Oh, she's 82. Okay, good. I feel better. So that being said, like there's something very powerful about that. But to your point, Andy, I think it does make it kind of harmful. And I think Gordis in some ways talks about that, right? Like in some ways, if you don't have your own personal theology, then you can't walk in like I want you in the room. I want you in the room no matter what you believe, by the by. But if you don't have a personal theology to figure out what works for you, then when you show up, if your only basis is the Siddur, you're going to be in deep trouble. Right? If your only basis is to read Torah and you read of a vengeful God and you don't think about all the goodness that God has created in the world, you may be in trouble. By the way, which is why I think that Christians and Jews sometimes think of God in different ways, right? I mean, as far as like a vengeful God or things like that, because they're not reading the commentary, which I think is amiss. Sherry, go for it.
Oh, well, go back 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, that's you know me better than anybody. Whatever.
So pray as if everything depends upon God, and act as if everything depends upon you. And that's how we have to live our lives. So in terms of belief or whatever, you have to function and be true to yourself. And yes, you pray to God and you daven and you go to services and you do all that and you read all the prayers, but you can't, he's not sending a lifeboat, he's not sending a helicopter, he's not sending whatever, to figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I apologize for showing my well, whatever it shows. For those of you, many of you know that I'm always been and always will be a diehard fan of the show The West Wing. If you haven't watched it, we can socially distance and you can come over and we can watch it and I'll give you the whole run through. It'll be great. You'll learn a lot about me and it'll be great. So there's a great scene in The West Wing where the chief of staff is talking to the deputy chief of staff, and they're, oh, excuse me, I apologize. The scene is entitled "On This Sabbath Day," and Jed Bartlett, who is the president of the United States, is a devout Catholic, right? Which the odds of that happening today are probably rarer, but he is a devout Catholic. And he doesn't commute the sentence of a man who has committed murder, okay? And so the priest, he's talked to the Pope, and the priest comes to the White House, comes to the Oval Office. And at the end, the scene is you see the man be executed. And as he's executed in the same frame, it's brilliant. I mean, only as Sorkin could pull off, right? Bartlett turns to the Pope and asks to pray the rosary and asks for confession. And in this scene, the priest says to him, you know, Jed, let me tell you a story, right? There's the guy who sees the flood coming, right? And he gets the radio report and he gets, you know, this, and he gets the radio report, and now he's on top of his house and he sees a boat go by and the boat says, Guy, let me help you. And he says, no, I pray, I'm religious. God will take care of me. And the next thing you know, a guy comes down with a medevac helicopter to get him and he says, no, I'm religious, I pray, God will take care of me. And the next thing you know, he dies in the flood, and he shows up before God, according to the story being told by the priest. He shows up before God and he asks for an audience with the Almighty, and God says to him, what are you doing here? I sent you a boat, I sent you a radio broadcast, and I sent you a medevac helicopter. At some point, we have to act on our own. Like at some point, we need to do. If we live life thinking that God is simply going to take care of every single one of our needs, I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but it doesn't work that way. And by the way, I don't care whether you're a diehard, knee-deep conservative Jew, if you are a devout and incredibly erudite rabbi like Rabbi Stoller, or you are Rabbi Ari Demnitzer or Rabbi Mendel Katzman. Right? We are here with God to complete the world and to make it a better place. It is not simply left that we're supposed to say to God, go do your thing. I'll be here when you're done. Doesn't work like that. Doesn't work like that. So, okay, I got a couple of other things here. So I want to go through some. Oh boy, that was bad. Okay, I got it. Okay, so a couple of questions. So a question of spirituality is individual, right? I'm going to read something that I think is important. So one can see it doing good things in the world and being kind. Other will practice all ways to search for the connection directly to God. Being religious has to do with practicing the way of Torah and Halakha, which is in itself the search for God. So by the way, I agree with that wholeheartedly, right? As I teach a class on Monday nights on Halakha, I believe that that is a journey and a teaching. What I would say though is, I think that there are people, I will tell you, while my morning minyan attendance, I always like to fill in, but my morning minyan attendance is not always perfect. I would tell you that there are days, back up. When I was at the University of Maryland, there was a great picture on the wall, not of Schneerson, but at the Chabad house, okay? And at the Chabad house, there was a picture of the rabbi, and there were 10 people randomly spread throughout the room. And I remember being a freshman and I was a little bit nervous, and I went up to Rabbi Bachman, who, like, by the way, looked like he was 50, but was actually probably like 27 years old because of his beard. I mean, like, the guy looked like he was elderly. I mean, he looked like he was an art member and was like literally barely married. He also, whatever, that's a different story. It's for a different time. Anyway, Rabbi Bachman was amazing. He was amazing. And I remember looking at him one day and saying, Rabbi Bachman, forget the Schneerson photo. What's this other picture you've got on the wall? You've got 10 people and one putz who's sitting here leading services. What's the deal? And he said, Stephen, the reason you're supposed to have a minyan is because one guy is supposed to be leading services and the other 9 are supposed to be lost. The other 9 are supposed to be looking around, looking in the Siddur, and they got stuck. Do you know how much, by the way, just as a point of reference, and you can't tell anybody else, right? Just between us, that I hate calling pages. I have to get like a PhD in it, but like I hate calling pages. There's no class, by the way, at HUC or JTS. You just have to learn. I despise it because there's somebody on page 27 who is immersed in page 27. They find 27 and they're on the poetry of page 27 and they love page 27. And I'm the schmuck that has to say, we're now on Ashrei on page 33. Who cares? Stay on 27. Find meaning on 27. What does it matter if we moved on to the Torah service? Who cares? You found meaning. You hit the jackpot. So to the question or the point being made, which I think is brilliant, of teaching of Torah and Halakha teaches us this search of God, I'm all for that. And I do believe you're probably right that spirituality is individual. But I also think that it can be communal, right? Like, I mean, I think that it can be. And maybe some of us have experienced or not, right? Like, I mean, again, it's funny how I would mention other traditions. I didn't get to go on this summer. It was one of the things that whatever, it is what it is. You have regrets in life. We had our interfaith trip to Israel this summer. And so members of the Methodist Church at St. Luke and members of Bethel went to Israel, about 30 people, okay? And while I prepped the trip, I didn't go. And one of the greatest conversations that I had with Pastor Marshall Johnson, for those of you who don't know Pastor Johnson, he's at St. Luke. He is the greatest mensch in the world. If you ever need a Methodist pastor or somebody you ever want to talk to, he is amazing. And that doesn't discount all the folks that are amazing and wonderful at Tri-Faith. I know just Pastor Johnson is a dear friend of mine. Marshall and I were talking, and I said to him, I can't stand whenever I go to the Kotel, because all these fakers, they're all at the Kotel and they're all davening and they're talking about the Wailing Wall being rebuilt and the Third Temple. It's such nonsense. And he looked at me and I said, but when I go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I'm moved. They're so incredible. They're sitting there, they're praying where they think that Jesus was crucified. and how amazing this is. They kissed the rock where they believe that it happened. How amazing is this? How amazing is this? And he looked at me and said, yeah, they're all full of it. And I started laughing. I said, so wait a second. So you mean to tell me that the same thing that I think of my folks is the same thing if you think of your folks, but individually we actually find the opposing to be incredibly meaningful. When he looks at my folks, he finds deep individual spirituality. And when I look at his folks, I find it to be incredibly meaningful. So I don't necessarily want to push back. I don't necessarily want to push back on the fact of saying that we are. Hold on one second. I don't necessarily want to push back on the fact of saying that spirituality has to be individual, but I would tell you that, you know something, I think that it can be communal. Right? If you're in the same room with a group of people, you know sometimes that those goosebumps are because of the fact that everybody in that room is feeling the same way. And that's incredible. And by the way, I will admit to you that it's probably only happened to me a half dozen times in a synagogue. It happens to me in other places. And the reason is because I work there. I don't go to synagogue to pray. I go to synagogue to work. There are moments when I lose myself. But most times, I'm looking at the clock underneath the table that Rabbi Drazen of blessed memory placed there, because he knew that if he wasn't done by noon, someone was going to yell at him. God bless his soul. And if you were one of the people on this call who were yelling at him, I'm really sorry. Don't take that the wrong way. Right? Because that's not davening. Like, that's something, but it ain't davening. So like, it's gotta be meaningful. It's gotta be meaningful. So the spirituality part, I guess, is the can you be religious? Can you put on to fill? And I say this being kind of funny, and then I'm gonna shut up for a moment, which I realize is really uber difficult for me. But can you be religious? Can you put on tefillin every morning? Can you show up for Shabbat services? Can you do all those things? Not necessarily at Bethel Temple or Beth Israel, right? It can be at home. But can you do all of those things? And there are some moments where you get lost in what you're doing, that you get that goosebump moment. And that moment is still religious, but the word that we've now found in our vernacular is spiritual. But what was the impetus for it was still religious. Now, the lecture wasn't religious. It was clearly probably spiritual, but it had the same meaning. It was the same thing, right? It did the same thing. I imagine if people who heard Heschel speak, well, they probably were bored, but now we love him. But the point of the matter becomes, like, you would have goosebumps. It'd be amazing. Somebody else say something. I love, by the way, all of the Zoom chat. I love the 3D world of Zoom, that you can chat at me and everything else. But what other thoughts? Somebody, hold on. Tuffy, yeah.
You're saying this, and you talk not on purpose against music. I mean, just on the side, because you never wanted to hear a bad instrument played when you were a kid. That's fine. The point still is, I hear a perfect symphony, and I get those same goosebumps. Several months ago, I heard the Boston Symphony playing Rite of Spring in Boston with all the things that go on, and I don't know how I ever left the place. Seriously. And it's the same thing as a religion, to me at least. Plus, I have all the trappings of, I think I'm not a great Jew, but I consider myself a fairly good Jew. And I think that you get those goosebumps when you're doing what you feel is absolutely perfect for you.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you this, to your point, for as much as I failed music appreciation, okay, other than Friday night, my friend, I probably failed music appreciation. I will tell you that when I hear things like Ave Maria, I cry. I don't know what it means. I've never even taken the time. I am sorry to admit it. I've never taken the time to look at the words. But I am.
Rabbi, they're praying to Mary. That's what Ave Maria
Yeah.
is.
Well, I got that part, but I don't. But another.
It's no longer a prayer as such.
Yeah, but it brings me to tears.
Well, why can't there be lots of things in life that give you those emotions? Certainly, Heschel would say there are all kinds of awesome moments in this world and in life.
God is in all sorts of things in life.
Right. Maybe another question related to this very complex thing is, why is it today that so many people find it uncomfortable to say that I believe in God?
Well, so okay, so
You know?
well, I think that goes back to the beginning. I think in so many ways, because of the fact that people don't know what God is, and they're afraid of the fact of what they think God is supposed to be, that they're afraid. And in addition to the fact of we need God in certain moments.
So I'll give you one little thing. Hope.
Yeah.
God to me represents hope. And my daughter was feeling kind of depressed about things, and there's a lot to be worried and depressed about.
Sure.
I said, and this is just me, why are we commanded to believe in God? Commanded to love God. Commanded to love God.
Yep.
And maybe that's because of this situation. If God does represent light and hope and the future, even in the darkest times, we must be commanded to remember those things. That there is hope, that there is purpose, that there is light. That's
So, listen, I think that I never liked it. I don't want to say I don't like people. People, that's a bit strong. I don't agree with people who write God G-D. Okay? I hate to break it to you, but God is a job title. God is a profession. God is not the name of anybody. Right? If you wanted to put R-BBI, I would think that you were just being like comical and funny and ridiculous, right? God's name, Adonai, Hashem, Adonai Tzifaot, all kinds of great names, right? Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh, beautiful. God is not the name, okay? Going back to Steve's point for a moment, okay? There is something powerful about believing in something that is greater than ourselves and being able to have a belief in that and knowing that there is something else controlling or trying to control the way things are working, that there is a purpose or there is meaningfulness or fine. I also, as a devout Jew, right, part of my practice of taking 10 minutes a day for some private kind of meditation is that I recite the Serenity Prayer, right? That is not a Jewish text, because I realize that there is a lot going on in the world, and there's a lot on my shoulders, and there is only so much on my shoulders that I can deal with. I need to throw some of it up. And so that's what I do, right? I take that time to put some of it up and to let go and to realize that I believe that there is this greater being out there kind of looking out for our benefit. We'll come back to that in a moment. Andy, what were you gonna say?
Well,
Hold on one second, let Andy speak.
So two things. One, the
Hold on,
whole
Andy,
thing.
sorry, hold on, Andy, hold on. Andy, Florida, take 1 second. Andy Gordman, you're up.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about something you just said or said a little bit ago about you go to the synagogue to work,
Yeah.
not to pray.
Yeah.
So as a rabbi, then when do you get that time to be spiritual, or how are you spiritual? We're talking about how we feel when we walk in the synagogue. Then where do you go to get that feeling?
So I'm gonna probably cry as I say this. So when the Hazen and I rebuilt for Bethel, and again, so it happens in the building. It happens with my kids. So when we rebuilt the service, we were under some pressure because the first day of Rosh Hashanah was when the most amount of people showed up at Bethel. It was a 2-day service. And so we rebuilt the service. The first day was like the best of. It was kind of like a Billy Joel album. I wasn't a fan of it, but it was what it was. The second day was a more complete version of what the service looked like. It's still not complete between you and me, but it is what it is. That said, we get to Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur is draining. By the end of Yom Kippur, I am mentally and emotionally spent. I want to give the Hazen a hug. I want to wish him Mizal Tov and well done, and I want to go to bed. I mean, I'm done. But there is a moment typically at Mincha, before Ne'ilah, where it's not a full crowd, right? It's a decent crowd, but it's not a full crowd because they want to show up for the end for Ne'ilah. And at that moment, nobody's really paying attention to me. I have to call a page or two, give or take, but I have a moment to myself. And a tradition that we started about 6 or 7 years ago, which was something that I had seen, it wasn't anything that I came up with, was to allow congregants to be able to walk up on the bima during the end of Ne'ilah. During Ne'ilah, it's customary to stand. So during the Shemona Esrei, during that Amida of the extra Amida during the Yom Kippur service, we allow people to walk up. And they would typically be with me. They would stand with me. And at that moment, I would realize why I was doing this. Now, I realize that all the time in the conversations. When people come to me with their one of the greatest lessons I ever heard from a rabbi who is a mentor to me, he looked at me flat out and he said, Stephen, the reason that you know, or that you will know, I'll say it that way, I don't mean for ego's sake. He said, the reason you will know, and the way that you will know that you are worth anything as a rabbi, anything, that you've done anything positive and that you are worth anything as a rabbi, is not if you can do a wedding, because any schmuck can do a wedding. But if you can be there when someone dies, and you can be there for people, and you can help them through the most difficult moments of their life, then the cream rises to the top. So I guess, Andy, to your question, I have to look for it, and it's really hard. And I would almost argue that it's probably not any easier for me than it is for other people in the room. And not to use a baseball metaphor, but it's what I'm used to and it's what speaks to me. I probably don't bat any better than a 200 average. For all the 10 times and by the way, I mean morning, evening minyan, Shabbat services, I would tell you that 1.5 out of 10 times do I get a goosebump moment. But man, when you get that goosebump moment, it's a golf shot. Like all you want to do is do it again. So that to me is like a driving force inside of my soul to say, I got to get there again. I don't know what happened in that moment, but man, I got to get there. Maybe it was Lior and Naamah standing next to me. Maybe it was the experience. Maybe it was the Hazen davening. Maybe it was the silence. I don't know. But we've turned the modern rabbinate into one that is based upon expediency and making things work as fast as they can in a structured setting, that they're almost a producer and director of a Broadway play, as opposed to somebody who is supposed to be bringing meaning and empowerment and inspiration to the community. Because you can't do both. You just can't. At least you can't do both in an hour and a half or 2 hours. It's virtually impossible.
Thank you.
Yeah. Andy Greenberg, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. That was remarkable. So thank you for number one for doing that. Number two, in terms of goosebumps and spirituality, I think in the past, most Jews, whether they believed in God or didn't, and they went to Kol Nidre services, years back, that's when the goosebumps came. And during Yom Kippur, when men and women would break down in tears during Yom Kippur, which you hardly see anymore in any one of our denominations, that was the goosebump spiritual moment. The other part of spirituality is a word that we don't often hear much anymore, but we did in the past, and that's kavanah. When you pray with feeling, you get that goosebump moment. And the third part is when exactly what you said. It is interesting for those that do not believe in God but show up for services, when we have the procession in front of the Aron Kodesh on Ne'ilah, that for those folks, and I think for many others watching it, that becomes a spiritual connection. Because if not, why are they going up there in the first place? And when they go up there, they say something. They say something and they pray to the Torah, or they pray to a book, or they pray to an inanimate object, but they do it. And that to them, I believe, is a spiritual goosebump moment.
Yeah.
We don't.
And let me be very clear here, to Andy's point, to other people's points, to some other comments that have been made here. I am not the judge. Right? Like I'm not giving out a star chart. I mean, I remember as a child, and I didn't think ill will of it. I thought it was actually, looking back on it, it was quite smart. The cantor at my parents' synagogue of blessed memory, who was a wonderful man, I probably didn't think as highly of him at the time as I should have, and that was my own service. He was a great guy. So they had a situation. They had a policy before it where each B'nai Mitzvah student, prior to their bar and bat mitzvah, had to attend like 20 or 30 services. I don't remember what it was. And so what you did was you would bring in across from his office was a box of index cards, and you would pick up the index card with your name on it that had stickers on it for as many services as you had attended, and you would bring it up to Cantor Levin of blessed memory, and you would bring it to Cantor Levin. Now, you couldn't just walk up to Cantor Levin and say, here, right? You had to go up to Cantor Levin and you had to hand it to him and say Shabbat Shalom, right? You had to have like a moment, right? You had to see eye to eye. You had to look at this man, by which, by the way, as a kid, I mean, I don't want to admit this, but like scared the crap out of you, right? Because for me, like he was the cantor. I mean, that was almost as much as Martin Halpern of blessed memory, you know, that he should, you know, like these were figures that I never in a million years. I mean, I think that they would probably be shocked that I went into the business that I went into, and at the same time, they'd be incredibly proud. That, like, there was meaning there. Like when I would hear, I can't, and I don't make this up. And if anybody wants it because they just want to hear it, I will send it to you. I have a Dropbox file of Cantor Levin and his beautiful daughter Dahlia singing Unatana Tokef. And before the high holidays, once I found it and I got it, I have to listen to it. As much as I love Lisa Marcus, as much as I love the Hazen, God bless them, it's got nothing to do with them. It's not about the beauty of the song. It's what brings back to me the memory. And it brings me to tears. And who shall live and who shall die, with all due respect, isn't necessarily tear-jerking. It's scary as crap. But like it's powerful. So I think in some of these situations, I mean, forget Judy Blume at this point, the reality of the situation becomes like we're drawn by these moments and we have to find them. I think our job as rabbis, as clergy, as leadership in the Jewish community, our job is to help Amcha, is to help the Jews, you on this call, other members. Our job is to bring you closer to an opportunity where you could perhaps have that feeling. But what you need to understand, and again, this is, I mean, you know, right, as I sit here as a baseball guy with, unfortunately, you know, the World Series canceled this year, but as somebody who loves baseball, although I sure as hell don't understand the rules Nebraska set out for the baseball guidelines this year, different story for a different day, nevertheless, right? That being said, as a baseball guy, I'm batting 100. And I would tell you, I'm probably going to get into, I mean, I'm not going to get into Cooperstown in any way, shape, or form, but I'm probably in Cooperstown when it comes to davening. Because that level of meaningfulness, that 1 out of 10 times I feel something go up my arm, is an amazing thing. And what do most Jews feel when they feel God and spirituality? What happens? They show up 2, maybe 3 times a year. They don't feel it, and they say, screw it. All right, out of guilt, I'll show up for mom or dad next year and I'll try again. Well, you know something? You're not trying enough. It doesn't work that way, right? It just doesn't work that way. And so we're supposed to, it's not a matter of trying harder, by the way. You're trying the exact amount of hard. It's supposed to be difficult. It's the fact that if you go more often, if you have the experience more often, and by the way, you can have it in your home. I mean, God help us, we're all quarantined. I mean, the point of the matter just becomes, it can happen by yourself. It doesn't have to happen with community. There's power in community. But it doesn't have to happen there. And you feel this incredible, incredible emotion, right? I mean, it's an outpouring. I mean, how many of you have had an experience, forget outside a synagogue, where like something happened and you listened to something, I don't care if it was a speech, and you literally almost wanted to, if not, you cried. It happens. It's real, right? That's those moments. And by the way, I would argue that God is in those moments, right? It mentioned earlier, you know, it's an interesting conversation. And so I apologize if I'm prefacing something. I try really hard. I mean, whatever. This is Omaha. I don't mean this is the wrong way. This is Omaha. This is a small town. Everybody knows everybody's business, and you sure know mine. So the reality is, like, life's hard. Life's complicated, right? It is not simple. So I do the very best that I can to find those moments. But rabbis are no different than the everyday Jew. Right? The only difference between me and you is that I went to rabbinical school and you went to X. That's it. I decided that I wanted to spend my life being immersed in Jewish text, trying to cause meaning for other people so that they could get closer. I sat in a meeting today with two people who I love and adore, and we were talking about mission statements. And I thought I was gonna like jump again out my window, right? I was gonna like whatever. And they looked at me and they said, Stephen, you're at the 50-yard line running as fast as you can towards the end zone, and you're carrying the congregation behind you, but they don't know exactly what island you're headed towards. And it hit me. You've got to be more clear about what you're talking about. You've got to empower them and inspire them to realize that what you're doing is for this reason. This is the way you understand Judaism. And you know something? I'm on the executive board of the Boys and Girls Clubs. When I sit at a meeting with Ivan, when I sit in a meeting with Scott Heider, when I sit in a meeting with these folks and I listen to the work they're doing, when we work with Barry Zub to talk about trying to work with KETV, which we're doing in June, to try and create a day where there's money from KETV and it all goes to help pay for these kids to have dinners and meals, because once school ends, these kids in North and South Omaha, as well as other places that are in our neighborhoods, don't have meals, gets taken care of. I go to bed perfectly fine. And it doesn't matter whether I daven Shachari, Mincha, or Mariv. Because I know that what I did completed me as a human being. So I think that if nothing else, we've got to figure out a way that as individuals, God willing as a community, but God willing as individuals, we can figure out a way that we find those moments because they're so powerful. Listen, I'm biased. I want you to find them at Bethel. I want you to find them at Temple. I want you to find them at Chabad or at Beth Israel. I want you to find them swimming laps at the JCC, right? I want you to find those moments. I'm biased that I want you to find them inside of a synagogue because that's the business I'm in. But I think that people need to realize that in order for you to find it, it can't be a one-off. Because if it's a one-off, no one bats 1,000. Right? I could take Ken Griffey Jr., put him in there. He hasn't hit in how many ever whatever, throw him 3 fastballs, and the kid may strike out because he hadn't hit a baseball in years. Doesn't work that way. But I venture to guess if I give him about an hour in a batting cage, there isn't anybody in the major leagues that want to face the kid, and he's in his 40s. It's just the way it works. We get better with practice. So too with davening. God's there. I think the problem becomes it's only in times when it's shitty that we look towards God and we say, shame on you. You did this. Mom got cancer. This happened. What happens when the good thing happens? How often do we look up in the heavens and say, thank you? It could have been worse. It's our mantra as Jews. So I think it's tough. But I would tell you that if there's anything else to gain from me, which probably isn't much, is the fact that you should take solace in the fact that I struggle with it too. Right? Because it's not simple. It's really not simple. Right? And so, yeah, I consider myself religious. I don't know what spirituality means. I consider myself religious. But I do find that there are moments of my religiosity that also happen to be spiritual. So, any last questions? I don't want to take up. I want to be respectful of you and your time. Any last questions, whether in person or over the chat thing?
Yes.
Please.
This is Carol.
Go for it.
I had an experience doing this COVID thing, speaking to my grandson in Israel.
Please.
And my grandson, you know, he's Orthodox, not ultra, but he's Orthodox.
Sure.
So we're discussing him being at home and how he can't go to school. And of course, he goes to a very religious school. So we were discussing him not going. And he said, well, he said his teacher, who I'm sure is a rabbi, said to him, well, this is just proves that the Mashiach is coming. And I was taken back a little bit. I wasn't sure what to say. But what I said was, I don't think so. I said, because we haven't finished yet completing what he created. And I didn't hear anything else, but I didn't have to hear anything else. So I'm just saying this is experience I had. Also, I wanted to also mention about the topic about spirituality and religion. I think most of the people who say that they're just spiritual and they can get whatever they got in the synagogue or the church by going to the woods, which I'm sure they don't do anyway, I think it's because they got turned off very early in religion. And no matter what religion it was, I think that they also got too with the dogma of the religion, the practices. I mean, let's face it, some of them are really don't make any sense whatsoever. So I think that's partially the problem with people saying, well, I'm spiritual and not religious.
Yeah, I think that's true. And listen, but I also hand it to your son. I mean, I don't want to cause like a family dilemma here, because you know how much I love you guys, and I don't know your son, but the truth would be that's a fab. I mean, listen, I had major issues at the beginning of this whole COVID thing, right? There were people in Borough Park that were having services, okay, in a religious section of New York. And what would happen, and there was a situation, forget the mayor, the whole mayor thing is a debacle, and he should be taken out back and whatever, because that he butchered that. But that being said, there were people that were going and davening, and then there were people who were really nervous for the betterment of everyone else, and they were calling 411 or 311, I think it is, which is in Manhattan, the non-emergency number, right? And they were saying, listen, there are 30 people that are having evening minyan, and they're going to get someone sick, right? And so, like, they're pictures of the people who called 311 were put on a picture. I can send it to you. They were put on an image. It was all in Yiddish, okay? And they were told, don't give these people aliyot, right? Because they spied on us, right? These were religious Jews. They spied on us, and they shouldn't be given aliyot, right? So listen, I'm not sure that I believe in a God. And by the way, and just so we're, and this isn't an ending, but I mean, I got nowhere to be, so I'm more than willing to converse. I just don't want to take your time. But the point of the matter is, every time I talk to Harris Frankel, who I think as a friend, as a mentor, and as somebody who I take for deep, deep, deep counsel, Harris will look at me and I'll say to him, thank you for everything that you're doing, but I don't see God in causing the virus, but I do see God in the doctors who are being able to make things better. Now, maybe I'm giving God the benefit of the doubt, but that's where I find God. It killed me. There was a woman named Michelle Burns. So she passed away Saturday evening. Saturday morning, I go for a run because of how fakakta services are, and for my own clarity of mind, I have to run every day. So I leave the apartment, I go for a run, I gotta clear my head. So I go for 6 to 8 miles every single day. It's the only thing that keeps me sane. So I'm running, and I get an email, my phone starts to beep. I always have my phone on me, regardless of Shabbos, for God forbid, for security purposes. I always have my phone on me. The phone beeps, and I see it's an email from Rami or Rob. Now, if it's an email from somebody else, I don't check the emails. It's Shabbat. but it's from Rami. And Rami may not be Shabbat observant, but Rami is not going to email me on Shabbat. And he tells me that Michelle's in the ICU. So I call, I'm lucky. I'm a rabbi in Omaha, right? I know people. I pick up the phone, I call 2 different doctors at Methodist, and I say, you got to get me into the ICU. You got to get me in the ICU. She's going to die. I got to get to the ICU. I love this woman. She's as sweet as we can be. I did her conversion. I love Rami. I know her daughter. You got to get me in the ICU. They call the house supervisor. The house supervisor says, listen, we're terribly sorry. And by the way, the protocol has changed since last Saturday for whatever it's worth. Okay. That was a little bit of a shouting match, but that process changed. And they said flat out, right, we can't have you and we can't allow you. And so I talked to her via FaceTime, and we talked, and it was fun, and it was what it was, and she died that evening. But when I talked to the 2 doctors, they said to me, Stephen, you can't go. You can't go. You can't risk your health and your kids' health. You can't do it. It's too crazy right now. And it's going to get worse, which, as we've seen, it has, right? It's gonna get worse. And so I tell that not because of the fact that she was such a wonderful person, which she was, but like that killed me, because I looked in the heavens and I said, this is a 60-year-old woman who just died of metastatic cancer. Why? But if I didn't have some type of belief in God, I don't know where I would go. And that's just me. I'm not putting that on anyone else. I'm just saying, for me, I needed to have that belief, because I need to be able to say why. Now, don't get me wrong. The last 2.5 miles, I was crying my eyes out. I mean, I was a mess. But the reality was that, like, it was crazy, right? And so, and so it's important. It's important to find that for yourselves. And I guess maybe the end to many of you is to say the following. When you figure out your personal theology, and maybe it's shit happens. I mean, whatever. I don't need it to be simplistic. It doesn't need to be complicated. But when you figure out your personal theology, the most important part of that theology is that it has to work in good times and in bad. If it only works when the money's coming in and the market's doing well and the payment and everything's doing well, that's great. It's great. But if somebody dies and somebody else is sick and somebody loses a job, and the same theology that you had in good times doesn't work, then it's organic. You better change. You got to figure something else out. And that's okay. It can be organic. It can evolve. But you've got to figure it out. And so that's why I'm really blessed, right? As being a rabbi, I'm really blessed because I got to read the greats, right? I got to read Heschel and Buber, and I got to read people like Kant and all those people based on being in rabbinical school, so that I could figure out, okay, this is what they believed. What do I believe? And it helped me formulate my own decision making. And by the way, I'm still not 100% sure that I'm there yet. But I promise you this, I'm not going to stop till I figure it out. This has been a whole lot of fun. I have taken more of your time than I should. You know my email, you know my phone number. I do not, as you can probably see from Facebook, I post things at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't sleep. That's either a positive or a negative, depending upon if you're paying my bills. So the reality of the situation is, if you need me, call me. If you have questions about this, please be in touch. If there are other questions or there are book suggestions about theology, I really include the Daniel Gordis book, the book about religion for atheists. I really encourage anything by Heschel is fantastic. Just know that if you read it by Heschel, you're going to have to read it 3 times. So give yourself the ability to read it, because it's going to take you you can't just read it once. It's impossible to understand unless your IQ is way far beyond mine, which may not take a lot of work, but you're going to have to figure it out. It's an amazing world where I could be watching my son create a 3D train on the floor using his iPad. It's an amazing world that we've changed into. If you don't have spirituality and faith from that, I don't know what you have. So in any case, I love you all. It's been wonderful studying together. Next week, you'll have Rabbi Stoller for a similar topic, although I totally hijacked this and did what I want, so I feel bad for him for whatever is being done next week. But he will do an amazing job. And if you want to talk about a scholar, man alive, you've got one in Rabbi Brian Stoller, because the writing and the area edition is just off the charts. So he'll be teaching next week. And then don't forget the Tikkun Leil Shavuot that we'll do the first night of Shavuot. Most likely what it'll look like is a panel discussion. So we'll probably do 2 different discussions, one from like 7 to 8 and one from 8 to 9. And it'll be Q&A and it'll be discussion, but we'll involve all the clergy. Rabbi Berezin, Cantor Alexander, Rabbi Stoller, myself, Hazan Krausman. It'll be all of us taking part in that. So it should be a whole lot of fun for a level of learning. So again, thank you. Thank you to all of us for being here. Cassandra, thank you for tolerating me for going over. And I really appreciate it. I love you all. Have a wonderful night and stay safe.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Right.
Thank you.
Tomorrow, everybody be safe.
Thank you very much.
Take care.